Why, there's some people who deprive themselves of everything, eatable, drinkable, and smokable. They pay this price for health, and health is all they ever get out of it. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for coming to the services this evening. I almost missed them myself. I came by railroad. It's one of those trains that gets tired every 7 minutes and has to stop and rest for 3/4 of an hour. One of the passengers advised the conductor to take the cow catcher off the front end and put it on the rear, because at the rate we were going, we were not going to catch any cows. But there wasn't anything to prevent them from climbing aboard on the rear end. If I have to go to heaven by railroad, I shall go the other way. There was a dog that came on early in the morning and barked steadily at nothing. I'd never seen one of its kind before. It's a long, low dog with very short legs. Something like Princess Turned the Wrong Way. It's built on a plan of a bench, really. He seemed to be satisfied, but I thought the plan structurally weak because of the distance between the forward supports and those to the rear. Seems to me it'd be a stronger and more practical dog if it had more legs. I didn't ask what kind of dog it was, or how it came to be deformed. But the owner was obviously very fond of it, said it was a well-known dog, had taken prizes in dog shows, said people often stopped in the street to look at it. Well, this did not seem strange to me. I could have told him, if you take a dog like that anywhere in the world and not charge anything, people will stop and look at it. If I were built that way, I would take prizes myself. Oh, he said he'd been all over the world with that dog, to India and Africa. He said he's going back to Africa to fight elephants with him. I think he'd be disappointed. That dog is not intended to fight elephants. I didn't say he'd run away if he saw one coming. He did look like the kind of dog that would sit down and pray. I don't think it was a dog at all. I think it's on the verge of being a dog. Saturday morning was come, and all the summer world was bright and fresh and brimming with life. There was a song in every heart, and if the heart was young, the music issued at the lips. There was a cheer in every face and a spring in every step. The locust trees were in bloom, and the fragrance of their blossoms filled the air. Cardiff Hill, beyond the village and above it, was green with vegetation, and it lay just far enough away to seem a delectable land, dreamy, reposeful, and inviting. Tom appeared on the sidewalk with a bucket of whitewash and a long handled brush. He surveyed the fence, and all gladness left him, and a deep melancholy descended upon his spirit. 30 yards of board fence, 9 feet tall. Life to him seemed hollow, and existence but a burden. Sighing, he dipped his brush and passed it along the topmost plank, repeated the operation, did it again, compared the insignificant whitewashed streak with the far-reaching continent of fence, and sat down on a tree box discouraged. Jim came skipping out the gate with a tin pail in his hand, singing Buffalo Gals. Buffalo gals, won't you come out tonight, dance by the light of the moon. Bringing water from the town pump had always been hateful work in Tom's eyes before, but now it did not strike him so. He remembered that there's always company at the pump. Boys and girls were always there, resting, exchanging playthings, whirling, fighting, skylarking. And he remembered that although the pump was only 150 yards off, Jim never returned in less than an hour. And even then, someone generally had to go after him. Tom said, "Say, Jim, I'll fetch the water if you'll whitewash some." "Can't, Mars Tom. The missus, she say to me, you go get this water and don't stop fooling around with anybody. She says she expect that Mars Tom going to ask me to whitewash. And she say, you go along, tend to my own business." She allowed she'd tend to the whitewashing. "Oh, never you mind what she said, Jim. That's the way she always talks. Give me the bucket. I won't be gone only a minute. She won't ever know." "Oh, I dasn't, Mars Tom. The missus, she'll take and tar the head off me. Deed she would. She never licks anybody. Racks them over their head with her thimble. And who cares for that, I'd like to know. She talks awful, but talk don't hurt. Anyways, it don't if she don't cry. Jim, I'll give you a marvel. I'll give you a white alley." Jim began to waver. "A white alley, Jim, and it's a bully tall." "My, that sure is a fine gay marvel. But Mars Tom, I's powerful afraid old missus. And besides, Jim, if you will, I'll let you see my sore toe." Well, Jim was only human. And this latest attraction was too much for him. He put down the pail, took the white alley, and was bending over the toe with absorbing interest while the bandage was being unwound. In another moment, he was flying down the street with the pail in his hand and a tingling rear. Tom was whitewashing with vigor, and Aunt Polly was retiring from the field with a slipper in her hand and triumph in her eye. But Tom's energy did not last. He remembered the fun things he had planned for this day, and his troubles multiplied. Soon the boys would come tripping along on all sorts of delicious expeditions, and they would make a world of fun of him for having to work. The very thought of it burnt him like fire. He took out his worldly goods and examined them. Bits of toys, marbles, trash, enough to buy an exchange of work, maybe, but not half enough to buy half an hour of pure freedom. He returned his straitened means to his pockets and gave up on the idea of trying to buy the boys. At this dark and hopeless moment, an inspiration burst upon him. Nothing less than a great, magnificent inspiration. He took up his brush and went frankly to work. Ben Rogers hove into sight presently, the very boy of all boys whose ridicule he most dreaded. Ben's gait was the hop, skip, and jump, proof enough that his heart was light and his anticipations high. He was eating an apple and letting out a long, melodious whoop, whoop at intervals, followed by a deep-toned ding, dong, dong, ding, dong, dong, for his personating a steamboat. As he drew near, he took to the middle of the street, leaned far to starboard, and rounded to ponderous and with laborious pomp and circumstance, for he was personating the big Missouri and considered himself to be drawing 9 feet of water. He was boat and captain and engine bells all combined, so he had to imagine himself standing on his own hurricane deck, issuing the orders and executing them. "Stop her, sir!" Ting-a-ling-ling. The headway drew almost out as he slowly approached the sidewalk. Ship up to back, ting-a-ling-ling. His arms straightened and stiffened down his side. Let her go back on the starboard, ting-a-ling-ling, chow to chow chow. His right hand, meanwhile, began making stately circles, for it represented a 40-foot wheel. Let her go back on the larboard, ting-a-ling-ling, chow to chow chow. His left hand began to describe circles. Stop the starboard, ting-a-ling-ling. Stop the larboard, come forward on the starboard. Stop her, let your outside turn over slow. Out with the headline. Come, lively now. Out with that spring line. But turn around that stump with the bite of it. Stand by that stage. Now, let her go. Done with the engine, sir. Ting-a-ling-ling. Chow to chow chow. Tom went right on whitewashing, paying no attention to the steamboat. Ben stared a moment and said, "Hiya, you're up a stump, ain't you?" No answer. Tom surveyed his last touch with the eye of an artist, gave his brush another gentle sweep, and surveyed again as before. Ben ranged up alongside of him. Tom's mouth watered for the apple, but he kept on with his work. Ben said, "Hello, old chap. You've got to work, hey." Tom whirled and said, "Why, it's you, Ben. I warn't noticing." "I'm going in swimming, I am. Don't you wish you could? But no, you'd rather work, wouldn't you?" Tom contemplated the boy a moment and said, "What do you call work?" "Why, ain't that work?" The brush continued to move. "Well, maybe it is, and maybe it ain't. All I know is it suits Tom Sawyer." "Oh, come on now. You don't mean to let on that you like it." "Like it? I'd like to know why I shouldn't like it. Does a boy get a chance to whitewash a fence every day?" That put the thing in a new light. Ben stopped munching his apple. Tom let his brush go daintily back and forth, stopped to note the effect, added a touch here and there, critiquing the effect again. Ben, growing more and more interested, more and more absorbed, finally he said, "Say, Tom, let me whitewash a little." Tom considered, was about to consent, but altered his mind. "No, I reckon it wouldn't do, Ben. See, Aunt Polly's awful particular about this fence. It being out here on the street and all. If it was a back fence, I wouldn't mind and she wouldn't. Yes, she's awful particular about this fence. It's got to be done very careful. I reckon there ain't one boy in 1,000, maybe 2,000, that can do it the way it's got to be done. Oh, come on now. Let me just try just a little. I'd let you if it was me, Tom. Ben, I'd like to, honest. But Aunt Polly, well, Jim wanted to do it, and she wouldn't let Jim. Sid wanted to do it, and she wouldn't let Sid. So can't you see how I'm fixed? Okay, come on. Let me just try just a little bit. Say, I'll give you the core of my apple. Ben, I'd like to, honest, but Aunt Polly, I'll give you all my apple. Tom gave up the brush with reluctance in his face, but with alacrity in his heart. And while the great steamer, the Big Missouri, worked and sweated in the sun, the retired artist sat on a barrel in the shade nearby, dangled his legs, munched his apple, and contemplated the slaughter of more innocents. There was no lack of material. Boys hopping along every once in a while. They came to jeer, but remained to whitewash. When Ben Rogers fagged out, Billy Fisher bought in for a kite in good repair. And when he faded, Johnny Miller bought in for a dead rat and a string to swing it with. And so on, hour after hour, until when the middle of the afternoon came, Tom, from being a poor, poverty-stricken boy in the morning, was literally rolling in wealth. He had, besides the things already mentioned, 12 marbles, part of a juice harp, a piece of blue bottle glass to look through, a spool cannon, a key that wouldn't unlock anything, a tin soldier, a fragment of chalk, a grass stopper of a decanter, a couple of tadpoles, 6 firecrackers, a kitten with only one eye, a brass doorknob, a dog collar, but no dog, couple of pieces of orange peeling, a handle of a knife, and a dilapidated old window sash. He had had a nice, good, idle time all the while. Plenty of company, and the fence had 3 coats of whitewash on it. If he hadn't run out of whitewash, he'd have bankrupted every boy in the village. Tom said it wasn't such a hollow world after all. Well, now, ladies and gentlemen, I've introduced you to Tom Sawyer. Now I want to introduce you to myself. I wish to present to you a man whose great learning and veneration for truth are only exceeded by his high moral character and majestic presence. I refer in these vague general terms to myself. I consider introductions unnecessary, but if it's the custom to have them, well then I prefer to do the act myself, because I can rely on getting in all the facts. I was born modest, but it wore off. I was once presented to an audience by a lawyer who kept his hands in his pockets. He introduced me as Mark Twain, a humorist who was really funny, a very rare creature indeed. Why, I was struck speechless by this complimentary thunderbolt. I'd scarcely in my lifetime listened to a compliment so beautifully phrased or so well deserved. But we had in our midst a much rarer creature than a humorist who was really funny. We had a lawyer that kept his hands in his own pockets. Oh, but I do like compliments. My, we all do. Humorists, burglars, congressmen, all of us in the trade. Well, now think with me here a moment. Chaucer is dead. Dickens is dead. So is Milton, and so is Shakespeare. And I'm not feeling very well myself. My doctor tells me I'm on the verge of being an old man. But I don't put too much stock in that. I've been on the verge of being an angel all my life. That hasn't happened yet. He's not a very good doctor anyway. He only had 2 patients last year. One was a horse. The other was a sailor. And he asked the sailor what was the matter with him, and the man said, "Well, I'm a sailor." So he treated him for that. I've never seen a man die more peacefully. All you need to succeed in medicine is ignorance and confidence. This person is too rigid. If you didn't sign on for the season, he buried you. He's given up the practice of medicine next year and going into Christian Science. Calls it the Standard Oil of the future. Oh, I suppose I am getting old, though. I don't like to leave home anymore. I feel like a little Tennessee girl whose family was moving to Missouri. When it came time to leave, she went out in front of the house and said, "Goodbye, house. I'm going to Missouri. Goodbye, green grass. I'm going to Missouri. Goodbye, God. I'm going to Missouri." Now, you know that little girl didn't say, "Goodbye, God, I'm going to Missouri." She said, "Good. By God, I'm going to Missouri." Well, I hope you don't mind if I smoke. I believe there's some commandment against smoking during insurrections of this dignified nature, but I'm working to get them removed. I can't see any harm in it so long as there's no children present. I never began smoking myself until I was 9 years old. Even then I was not constant. I was always ready to reform if I could see any profit in it. The only profit I could ever see in it is that heavenly pleasure of giving up the reform and going back to smoking again. I came into this world asking for a light. I expect to go out of it blowing smoke rings. A person with no bad habits, nothing the matter with them, must feel pretty tame and colorless after all. It's the way a saint feels, I suppose. It's the way they look anyway. I think temperance is best. Intemperate temperance is actually troublesome. Besides, my religion does not condone total abstinence. We believe in reform, but not to excess. We don't lose all control. Why, there's some people who deprive themselves of everything, eatable, drinkable, and smokable. They pay this price for health, and health is all they ever get out of it. It's like paying out your whole fortune for a cow that's going dry. I gave up these projectiles one time on the advice of my doctor. I'd been confined to my bed for several days with a lumbago. Finally, he says to me, "Look here, my rheumatism haven't got a chance. Look what they have to fight besides the lumbago. You smoke extravagantly. You eat all manner of things that disagree with each other's company. You drink 2 hot scotches every night, don't you?" I said, "Why, yes, I do. But I only drink them as a preventative of the toothache." I've never had the toothache. I don't ever intend to have it. Well, he said, "That's all right, but we can't make any progress this way. You've got to moderate these things." I said, "I can't do it, doctor." He said, "Why can't you?" I said, "I lack the willpower. I can cut them off entirely, but I can't moderate them." Well, he said that would answer. So I cut off all these things for 2 days and 2 nights. At the end of that period, the lumbago was discouraged and left me. I was a well man again. So I gave thanks and took these delicacies again. Well, then I had the occasion to recommend this remedy to an elderly lady friend of mine. She'd gone down and down to the point where medicines no longer had any helpful effect on her. I told her I could cure her in a week. I said she must give up smoking and drinking and eating and swearing. By the end of the week, she'd be on her feet again. Why, she said she couldn't give up smoking and drinking and swearing because she had never done any of those things. So there it was. She neglected her habits. She was a sinking ship with no freight to throw overboard. Why, just 1 or 2 little bad habits would have saved her. She was just a moral pauper. Well, now, when I was a young man studying for the gallows, I went west on the overland stage to make my fortune in the silver lands of the Nevada Territory. In the morning of the 19th day, we came to Nevada and crossed the Carson River, a moist pit about the size of the Erie Canal. If ever is my river, I wouldn't leave it outdoors at night. Afraid a dog would come along and lap it up. The gold and silver fever was running high out there in Nevada at the time, and I came down with the disease straight away. I wanted to be a millionaire. Of course, I was against one in principle. I knew that money was the root of all evil, and I wanted all of it I could get. Well, I tried the silver mining business for a while, but I didn't like it. You had to use a shovel. That was work. I didn't want to meddle with something I didn't understand. So eventually I went over to San Francisco looking for a job there. I arrived in San Francisco with a very bad cold. A lady at the hotel advised me to drink a quart of whiskey every 24 hours. A friend up the street recommended exactly the same thing. That made half a gallon. I've been drunk before, but that was a masterpiece. I went to bed early that evening. Had a terrible nightmare. Dreamed I was baptized. I was awakened around 2 a.m. by a man in the next room who was learning to play the trombone. The slowness of his progress was almost miraculous. He's playing Old Dan Tucker, and he kept missing the same note. I kept waiting for it to come around each time. Torture of torture. I'd rather go to church than listen to a man learn to play the trombone. I don't know what dreadful insanity moves a person to try to become a musician in defiance of the will of God. I fell victim to it myself once time. My instrument was the accordion, and my tune was Old Lang Syne. Well, after practicing on Old Lang Syne for about a week, I began adding little verses and variations to it. I wanted to improve on the original melody. Finally, the landlady came up and said, "Mr. Clemens, don't you know any other tune but that?" I said, "No, I don't." She said, "Then stick to it just as it is. Quit adding those variations. You're driving the boarders out of their minds." One poor fellow tried to tomahawk his mother. Well, I moved over to Ms. Murphy's boarding house after that, and one evening I struck up those variations. And this nefarious old man walked in, a smile of indescribable happiness on his face, placed his hand on my head and said, "God bless you, young man. For years I have suffered from an incurable disease, and knowing that I was doomed, I have struggled with all of my powers to resign myself to my fate. But the love of life was too strong within me. But heaven bless you, my boy. Since I've heard you play that tune and those variations, I am willing to die." In fact, I am anxious to die. Well, I kept looking for a job there in San Francisco, but I was very, very particular about the kind of job I wished I would get. I didn't want to work. All I wanted was employment. So I became a newspaper reporter. I hated to do it, but I couldn't find honest employment. I landed a job on the morning call and was trying to come up with an unusual story, something that would capture the fancy of the town. And I had this young friend who's an anarchist, but anarchy wasn't doing too well that year. And my friend the anarchist said he thought his life was a failure. I said I thought it was too. He said he thought he ought to commit suicide. I said, all right. Which is disinterested advice to a friend in trouble. Of course, I could see there was a story there. I wanted to get it. Used all levels of friendship to keep this depression in my friend's mind. Would-be suicides are not dependable. Hard to hold to their purpose. He had a preference for a pistol, which was extravagant. We didn't have enough between us to hire a pistol. A fork would have been easier. He finally decided he's going to drown himself. And I said I thought that was an excellent idea. The only trouble was he's a good swimmer. But we went down to the beach anyway. Then something most dramatic happened. There came in on that sea something that had been on its way for years. It came rolling in across the broad Pacific with a message that was full of meaning for that poor young man. It was a life preserver. So here was a complication. Then I had an idea. I suggested that we pawn the life preserver and get a revolver. Well, the pawnbroker gave us an old Derringer with a bullet about the size of a hickory nut. Oh my, what a terrible moment it was when my friend stood there with that pistol pressed against his forehead, waiting. Finally I said, well, pull the trigger. And he did. And it changed his whole life. It blew a tunnel straight through his head. You could look right through it. It took out all the gray matter out of his brain. And he was sent to Congress. He got a bill passed to pay for a $10,000 agricultural fair to show off $40 worth of pumpkins. Grown on his brother's farm. He spent 2 terms in Congress and 1 in the penitentiary. Then that fellow sent back home and now a respectable member of society again. Gone to work for Standard Oil. You know, sometimes it does seem to me that Washington is a stud farm for every jackass in the country. Look at the president, Teddy Roosevelt, the great hunter and conservationist. Just last week he shot a bear, chased it clear across the state of Louisiana with a squadron of dogs and half the military behind the United States after him, while the rest of the country stood by and admired the inhuman spectacle. Shot a bear when he could have stayed home and shot a senator. If it was a bear. Some say it was a cow. Evidence points to a cow. Even left a cow track behind with what else a cow leaves behind, which is what any sane cow would do in distress. Or at any other time she knew the President of the United States was after him. A grown man would have milked the cow and let her go. But the president is still 14 years old after living half a century. I never vote for politicians. It only encourages them. Well, I finally hired a hall and gave a lecture. And I've never had to do a day's work since. I had a new career. So I went forth on the public highway with all the other bandits and gave readings from my works. I became personally acquainted with that great menace to the itinerant lecturer, known as the local interviewer. You know, it's a time-worn custom of these people to probe you with a long string of personal questions, which you try to answer just as conscientiously as you can. Then he goes home and improves you. You can go over the printed result with a divining rod and never find yourself. Well, for years I've tried to outwit these people. One of these villains came to me one time when I was out on a raid, knocked on my hotel room door and announced he's connected to the daily thunderstorm. My first impulse was to pulverize him with a chair, but he sat down in it before I could go into action. I was not at my best that morning. My powers were somewhat under a cloud, so I thought I would try to confuse him. He started out. He sat down. He sat down. Now then, Mr. Twain, will you let me ask you certain questions calculated to bring out the important points of your public and private life? I have a very poor memory. Oh, that's quite all right, so long as you'll do the best you can. I will. I'll put my whole mind to it. Thank you. Are you ready to begin? Ready. How old are you? 19. In June. Why? I would have taken you to be much older than that. Thank you very much. Where were you born? In Missouri. When did you first begin to write? In 1836. Well now, how could that be if you're only 19 years old? I don't know. Well, it does strike one as rather curious. Yes, it certainly does. Well, let me ask you, whom do you consider the most remarkable man you ever met? Oh, I suppose George Washington. George Washington. How could you have ever met George Washington? You're only 19 years old. Well, if you know more about me than I do, what'd you ask me for? It was only a suggestion. How did you happen to meet Mr. Washington? I was at his funeral one day and he asked me to make less noise. Good heavens, if you're at his funeral, he must have been dead. If he was dead, how could we care whether you made any noise or not? He was always a very particular man that way. But still, you said he spoke to you and yet he was dead. I didn't say he was dead. Well, wasn't he? Some said he was, yes. Some said he wasn't. What did you think? Bah, wasn't any of my business. Well, let me ask you something else. Have you any brothers or sisters? Well, now let me see. I believe so, but I don't right remember at the moment. Well, that's the most preposterous statement I've ever heard. I'm sure you've had a brother. Haven't I read somewhere that you had? Oh, yes, yes. Now that you mention it. I did have a brother. William. Bill, we used to call him. Poor old Bill. Is he dead? We never could tell. There was always a great mystery about that, you see. Well, that's sad. He disappeared then, did he? Yes, he disappeared in a rather general way. We buried him. You buried him? You mean to tell me you buried him without knowing whether or not he was dead or not? Oh, no, he's dead enough, all right. He's always pretty dead. See, we were twins, Bill and I. We got mixed up in the bathtub when we were only 2 weeks old. And one of us was drowned. But we don't know which one. Some think it was Bill. Some think it was me. What did you think? Oh, I'd give worlds to know. But there's something rather peculiar about it. One of us had a curious mark. It was a mole in the back of the left shoulder. That was me. And that was the child that was drowned. Well, that ended the interview. And that evening in the local newspaper was the caption, "Deranged old man, loose in local hotel. Harmless, unless roused up." Well, now, ladies and gentlemen, when I was meandering out there in the West, I settled for a spell in Virginia City, which is a good place for a person to lose his religion. He had any left when he got there. There was wide open gambling, riots, street fights, a whiskey mill every 16 steps, half a dozen jails, and some talk of building a church. It was no place for a Presbyterian. And I did not remain one very long. Well, every now and then these days, the boys used to tell me I ought to get one Jim Blaine to tell the stirring story of his grandfather's old ram. But they always added that I must not mention the matter unless Jim was drunk at the time, just comfortably and sociably drunk. They kept this up till my curiosity was on the rack to hear the story. I got the haunting Blaine, but it was of no use. The boys always found fault with his condition. He was often moderately, but never satisfactorily drunk. I never watched a man's condition with such absorbing interest, such anxious solicitude. I never so pined to see a man uncompromisingly drunk before. At last one evening I hurried to his cabin, for I learned that this time his situation was such that even the most fastidious could find no fault with him. He was tranquilly, serenely, symmetrically drunk. Not a hiccup to mar his voice, not a cloud upon his brain thick enough to obscure his memory. As I entered, he's sitting on an old powder keg with a clay pipe in his hand. His face was round, red, and very serious. His throat was bare and his hair tumbled. On the pine table stood a candle, and its dim light revealed the boys sitting here and there on bunks, candle boxes, powder kegs. They said, "Shh, don't speak. He's about to commence." I found a seat at once. Blaine raised his hand to command silence. I don't reckon them times will ever come again. There never was a more bullier old ram than what he was. Grandfather fetched him from Illinois. Got him of a man by the name of Yates, Bill Yates. Maybe you might have heard of him. His father was a deacon, Baptist deacon, and he's a rustler too. As I was saying, he fetched that old ram from Siskiyou County, Illinois, and bring him home and turn him loose in the meadow. And went down next morning to have a look at him, and accidentally dropped a 10-cent piece in the grass and was bending over, so, fumbling in the grass to get it. Well, the ram was up there on top of the slope taking notice. But my grandfather wasn't taking notice because he had his back to the ram and was interested about the dime. Well, there he was, as I was saying, down at the further slope, bending over, so, And the ram was up there on top of the slope. And Yates is standing there, a little further away, 15 foot perhaps. Well, my grandfather was bending way over, and the ram was up there on top of the slope observing, you know. And Yates. Well, the ram, he bent his head down so. Yates assist Caillou. No, it couldn't have been Yates assist Caillou. I remember now he be Smith of Tulare County. Of course it was. I remember now perfectly plain. Well, Smith, he stood just there. My grandfather stood just here, was bending over, just so, thumbing in the grass. And when the ram see him in that attitude, he took it for an invitation. Here he come down the slope 30 miles an hour and his eye full of business. See, my grandfather's back being to him, and him by bending over like that, of course, why, sure it weren't Smith of Tulare at all. It's Smith of Sacramento. My goodness, how'd I come to get them Smiths mixed like that nohow? Why, Smith of Tulare was just a nobody. But Smith of Sacramento come from the best Southern blood in the United States. Weren't ever any better blood south of the line than Sacramento Smiths. Well, looky here. One of them married a Whitaker. I reckon that lets you understand the kind of society that Sacramento Smiths could associate around in. There ain't no better blood than Whitaker blood. I reckon anybody would tell you that. Look at Marion Whitaker. There was a girl for you. Little? Well, of course she's little. But what of that? Look at the heart of her. Had a heart like a bullock. Just as good and sweet and lovely and generous as the day is long. Why, if she had a thing and you wanted it, you could have it. Have it and welcome. Marion Whitaker couldn't have a thing and someone wanted it and not get it. She had a glass eye. Used to lend it to Flora Baxter, who hadn't any, to receive company in. Well, she was pretty large and it didn't fit. It was a size 7 and she was excavated for a 14. So that eye wouldn't lay still. Every time she winked, it would whirl over. It was a beautiful eye and set her off admirable because it's lovely pale blue on the front side you look out of, and it was gilded on the back side. Didn't match the other eye either. Just one of them browny, yellowy eyes. Tranquil and quiet, you know, the way them kind of eyes are. But it ain't no matter. They worked all right together, and it's plenty picturesque. Whenever Flora Ann winked, that homemade eye would give a whirl, and the other one stand still. When she begun to get excited, that handmade eye would give a whirl and keep on a whirling, faster and faster and a flashing, first blue and then yellow and then blue and then yellow. Well, sir, when that handmade eye begun a whistling and a flashing like that, the oldest man in the world couldn't keep up with the expression on that side of her face. Flora Ann Baxter married a Hagedorn. I reckon that lets you understand the kind of blood she was. Old Maryland Eastern Shore blood. Not a better family in the United States than the Hagedorns. Sally, that's Sally Hagedorn. Sally married a missionary and they went off telling the good news to the cannibals way out there in one of them islands in the middle of the ocean summers. And they ate her. Ate him too, which is irregular. It weren't the custom to eat the missionary, but only the families. And when they see what they'd done, they're dreadful sorry about it. And when the relations sent down there to fetch away the things, they said so. Said so right out. Said they're sorry and apologized. Said it shouldn't happen again. Says an accident. Now that's foolishness. There ain't no such thing as an accident. There ain't nothing that happens in the world but what was ordered just so by a wiser power than us. It's always for a good purpose. We don't know what the good purpose was sometimes. But ain't no matter. And ain't none of our business. All that concerns us is that it was a special providence and it had a good intention. No, sir. There ain't no such thing as an accident. Whenever a thing happens and you think it's an accident, you make up your mind it ain't no accident at all. It's a special providence. Oh, look at my Uncle Lem. Why do you say that? That's all I ask you. Look at my Uncle Lem and talk to me about accidents. It's like this. One day my Uncle Lem and his dog was downtown leaning up against some scaffolding, sick or drunk or something. There's an Irishman with a hot brick up the ladder along about the third story. His foot slipped and down he come, like a cat, dog, mule, bricks and all. Hit a stranger fair and square and knocked the everlasting aspirations out of him. He's ready for the corner in 2 minutes. Now people said accident. There wasn't no accident about it. It was a special providence, had a mysterious, noble intention in the back of it. The idea is save that Irishman. That stranger hadn't been there, that Irishman would have been killed. People said special providence. Sure. The dog was there. Why didn't the Irishman fall on the dog? Why weren't the dog appointed? For a mighty good reason. The dog would have seen him a-coming and have stood from under. You can't depend on a dog to carry out a special providence. You can't hit a dog with an Irishman because let's see. What's that dog's name? Oh yeah, Jasper. And a mighty good dog too. Best blood south. He weren't no common dog. He weren't no mongrel. He was a composite. A composite dog is a dog that's made up of all the valuable qualities that's in the dog breed. Kind of a syndicate. And the mongrel is made up of all the riffraff that's left over. That Jasper is one of the most wonderful dogs I ever see. Uncle Lem got him of the Wheelers. I reckon you've heard of the Wheelers. Ain't no better blood south of the line than the Wheelers. One day old Wheeler's meditating and dreaming around the carpet factory and the machinery made a snatch at him. First thing you know, he is meandering all over the carpet, the factory, from the garret to the cellar and everywhere. At such another pace as, why, he couldn't even see him. Only hear him whiz when he went by. Now, you know, you can't go through an experience like that and ride back home the way you was when you went. No, sir. Wheeler got wove up into 39 yards of the best 3-ply carpeting. The widow's sorry. She's uncommon sorry. Done the best she could for him in the circumstances. She took the whole piece. 39 yards. And she wanted to give him proper and honorable burial, but she couldn't bear to roll him up. So she went and spread him out, full length. Said she wouldn't have it any other ways. And she wanted to buy a tunnel for him, but there weren't no tunnel for sale. So she went and boxed him in a beautiful box and put him on a hill on a pedestal, 21 foot high. So it was a grave and a monument together, and economical. 60 foot high. You could see it from everywhere. And she had painted on it, to the loving memory of 39 yards. Go thou and do likewise. Well, the tears were streaming down the boy's cheeks, and they were suffocating with suppressed laughter. And had been from the beginning, though I had never noticed it. I perceived then that I was sold. I learned that Jim Blaine's peculiarity was every time he reached a certain stage of intoxication, no power on earth could prevent him from starting out with impressive unction of telling this marvelous adventure his grandfather had with an old ram. And the mention of it at the beginning was as far as anyone had ever heard him get concerned. Well, now, ladies and gentlemen, I've been told to give you a little bit of intermission. I understand we have some lemonade and Mississippi water out in the back, and this will be your first opportunity to escape. When I was a boy, I used to spend part of my summers out on my uncle's farm. Outside the fence was a country road, dusty in the summertime, a good place for snakes. We carried them home and put them in Aunt Betsy's work basket. She was prejudiced against snakes. And always when she'd take the basket on her lap and make the snake crawl out of it, it disordered her mind. My mother had a good deal of trouble with me, and I think she enjoyed it. She was a kind, generous person. She loved cats. She would drown the young kitten if necessary, but she always warmed the water first. I used to be drowned in the Mississippi River regular in the summer and be fished out and drained out, inflated and sent along again. Never seemed to bother my mother. She'd always smile and say people born to be hanged are safe in water. Well, now I'm going to bring you a selection from Huckleberry Finn. Huckleberry Finn is a book about a boy. Some of you have been boys, and the rest of you have had a lot to do with boys. Huckleberry Finn is a book about a boy that lived a great many years ago in the Mississippi River Valley. He was ignorant, unwashed, insufficiently fed, but he had as good a heart as ever anybody had. And he was only the really independent person in the community. For this reason, I suppose, he was continuously happy. We liked him. We admired him. We enjoyed his society. And because his society was forbidden us by our parents, we enjoyed him all the more. Now, in this book, Huckleberry tells his own story, all by himself. You don't know about me without you read a book by the name of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. That book was made by Mr. Mark Twain, and he told the truth, mainly. There was some things he stretched, but mainly he told the truth. Boy, that isn't fun. I never knowed anybody but lied one time or another, unless it was Aunt Polly or the Widder Douglas. The widder, she took me in as her son and vowed she would civilize me. She cried over me and called me poor lost lamb. She called me a lot of other names too. But she never meant no harm by it. Then she dressed me up in them new clothes, and I couldn't but sweat and feel all cramped up. Pretty soon I wanted to smoke, but the widder, she wouldn't let me. She said it was a mean practice and weren't clean, and I should try not to do it anymore. Ain't that the way with some people? They get down on a thing when they don't know nothing about it. She took snuff too. Of course, that was all right because she'd done it herself. Then her sister, Miss Watson, she took a set at me with a spelling book. She worked me milling hard for about an hour, and the widder made her eat supper. I couldn't have stood it much longer. Then for another hour, it was deadly dull. I was fidgety. Miss Watson all the time saying, "Don't put your feet up there, Huckleberry. Don't scrooge up like that, Huckleberry. Sit up straight. Can't you try to behave?" Then she told me all about the bad place, and I said I wished I was there. She got mad then. I never meant no harm. All I wanted was a change. Miss Watson, she said she's going to live so's to go to the good place. Well, I couldn't see no advantage of going where she was going. So I made up my mind I wasn't going to try for it. Well, one night I lit my candle and went up to my room, and there sat Pap, his own self. He tore into me something awful for dressing up, putting on airs, and going to school. Then he took $1 off me and went downtown to get some whiskey. Long in the spring, Pap, he catched me one day and took me up the river to a little log cabin over on the Illinois shore, and I never got no chance to run away. Pap was the meanest when it got to drinking, which was most of the time. One night he got drunk over in town and laid out in the gutter all night. He come back, said how I'd heard folks say there's going to be a trial, take me away from him and give him to the widder. Pap, he went to cuss and said, "Well, I'd like to see the widder get you." Then he took a swig or two and was against a ripping again. Whenever his liquor begun to working, he most always went for the government. This time he says, "Bah! Who wants the government? Why, look at it and see what it's like. Why, there's a law standing ready to take a man's son away from him. Man's own son. What he's had all the trouble and all the anxiety and all the expense of raising. Well, a man can't get his rights with a government like that. Well, look here. There's a free black man over there, acts most like a white man. He had on the whitest shirt you ever seen. Ain't a man in that town had on good clothes what he had on. And what do you think? Well, they said he was a professor in a college. Spoke all kinds of languages, knowed everything. That ain't the worst. They said he could vote when he was to home. Well, that let me out. Thinks I, what's this country coming to? It was election day and I was about to go and vote myself, but I was too drunk to get there. When they said there's a state in this country where they'd let that black vote, well, I drawed out. I said I'd never vote again. Them was my words, I said. They all heard me. Old Pap, he's carrying on so he never noticed where his old limber legs was taking him. And he went head over heels over a barrel of salt pork. And the rest of his speech was the hottest kind of language. Then he let all of a sudden and fetched that tub of ratting kick. But he weren't good judgment. That was the boot that had a couple of his toes leaking out of the front end. Well, I ran off from Pap pretty soon after that, hid out on Jackson's Island. And that's where I met Miss Watson's Jim. He said he'd run off too. He said he'd heard Miss Watson going to sell him for $800, and he couldn't stand to leave his wife and children forever. So he ran away. Well, I promised I wouldn't tell. Jim and me, we found an empty section of a log raft, and we went off down that river together. We let out nights and hid out during the daytime. We just let that raft float wherever the current wanted to take it to. It's lovely to live on a raft. We lay on our backs and smoke our pipes, look away in the sky. The sky looked ever so deep when you're laying on your back in the moonlight. I never knowed it before, or how far a body can hear on the waters at night. Once when I was in the canoe and Jim on the raft, the fog got so thick you could about float an oar on it. We tried to tie it to a towhead, but the current there was so swift it pulled us apart, and we was separated for hours. If you think it ain't dismal and lonesome to be out that way by yourself at night, you try it once. You'll see. Well, I got so tired, and I finally went for a cat nap. Only I reckon it's more than a cat nap. But when I waked up, the stars were shining bright, the fog was all gone, and I was spinning around a big bend stern first. First, I didn't know where I was. I thought I was dreaming. And when things began to come back to me, they seemed to come up dim out of last week. It was a monstrous big river here, with the tallest and the thickest kinds of timbers on both sides, just a solid wall, as well as I could see by the stars. I looked away downstream and thought I seen a black speck in the water and thought it was a raft and took off after it. But when I got to it, weren't nothing but a couple of saw logs made fast together. Then I spied another one and took after it, and then another one. And this time I was right. It was the raft. When I got to it, Jim was sitting there with his head between his knees asleep. His right arm was hanging over the steering oar. The other oar had been smashed off, and the raft was all littered up with leaves and branches and dirt. So she'd had a rough time. Well, it come to me that I could play a trick on old Jim. So I made fast and lay down under his nose, began to gape and stretch my fist out against him and says, "Hello, Jim. Have I been asleep? Why didn't you stir me up?" And Jim says, "Goodness gracious, is that you, Huck? And you ain't dead? You ain't drowned? Let me look at you, child. Let me feel of you. No, you ain't dead. You's back again, safe and sound, thanks to goodness." What's wrong with you, Jim? You been a-drinking? Drinking? Has I been a-drinking? Has I had a chance to be a-drinking? Well, what makes you talk so wild? How's I talk wild? Why ain't you been talking about my coming back and all that stuff as if I've been gone away? Huck Finn, look me in the eye. Look me in the eye. Ain't you been gone away? Gone away? Well, I ain't been gone nowheres. Where would I go to? Now look at here. There's something wrong there is. Is I me or who is I? Is I here or where is I? That's what I wants to know. Well, I reckon you're here plain enough, Jim, but I think you're a tangle-headed old fool. Oh, I is I? Well, you answer me this. Didn't you tote out the line in the canoe for to make fast to the towhead? No, I didn't. What towhead? I ain't seen no towhead. You ain't seen no towhead. Well, now look here. Didn't the line pull loose and the raft go humming down the river and leave you behind in the canoe in the fog? What fog? Why, the fog. The fog's been around all night. And didn't you whoop and didn't I whoop and we get all mixed up in the islands and one of us was lost and the other just as good as lost because didn't know where he was. Didn't I bust up against a bunch of them islands and have a terrible time and most get drowned? Ain't that so? You answer me that. Well, this is too many for me, Jim. I ain't seen no fog or no islands or no trouble or nothing. I've been sitting here all night talking to you about 10 minutes ago when you went to sleep, and I reckon I done the same. Now, you couldn't have got drunk in that length of time, so I reckon you've been a-dreaming. That fetch it. How's I going to dream all that in 10 minutes? Well, hang it all, you did dream it because there ain't nothing in it. But Huck, it's all just as plain to me as it don't matter how plain it is. I tell you, there ain't nothing in it. I know because I've been here all the time. Jim didn't say that for about 5 minutes, but sat there studying over it. Then he says, well, I reckon I did dream it, Huck. But dog my cats if it ain't the powerfulest dream I ever had. And I ain't never had no dream before to tire me out like this one. Well, that's all right, because a dream does tire a body out considerable sometime, Jim. But this one was one staving dream. Tell me about it. So Jim went to work and told me the whole thing right through, just as it happened, only he painted it up considerable. Then he said he must interpret it, because it was sent as a warning, and he done so. Oh, well, that's all interpreted well enough, Jim, says I. But tell me, what do these things stand for? It was the leaves and the rubbish in the smashed door. You could see them first rate now. Jim looked at the trash, then looked back at me, then looked back at the trash. He'd got the dream fixed so strong in his head that he couldn't seem to shake it loose and get the facts back in their place again right away. But when he did get them straight, he looked at me steady, without ever smiling, and says, what do they stand for? I'm going to tell you. When I got all wore out with the work and calling for you and went to sleep, my heart most broke because you was lost. And I didn't care no more what happened to me in the raft. And when I wake up and find you back again all safe and sound, the tears come. And I could have got down on my knees and kissed your foot. I was so thankful. And all you was thinking about was how you could make a fool of old Jim with a lie. That truck there is trash. And trash is what people is when they puts dirt on the heads of their friends and makes them ashamed. Jim got up slow and turned away without saying nothing but that. But that was enough. I never done him no more mean tricks. And I wouldn't have done that if I'd known him made him feel that way. It took me 15 minutes to apologize to a black man. But I'd done it, and I never felt sorry for it after it. I knew people would despise me and call me a low-down abolitionist, but I didn't care. I weren't going back there again, no way. Well, now, ladies and gentlemen, people frequently ask me why I dress this way. I'll tell you, I've traveled around quite a bit. I visited with savages. I visited with royalty. And I visited with plain, ordinary people. And one thing has always impressed me wherever I've gone. Clothes make the man. Naked people have very little impact on society. When I was out in San Francisco, Lady Luck happened to smile on me, and I was given a berth on the Sacramento Union as her special correspondent to the Sandwich Islands. Our first stop was Honolulu. I was naturally anxious to fully explore these lovely enchanted islands. They told me the best way to do so was to hire a horse. I'd had some unpleasant experiences with these unpredictable creatures before. Once in Carson City, I'd made the mistake of buying a genuine Mexican plug on the advice of a man I later discovered was the auctioneer's brother. As soon as I got on that horse, he put all of his feet together in a bunch, lowered his back and shot me 3 or 4 feet in the air. I came down on the saddle, shot up again, came down this time almost on the high pommel, which was too much variety for me. I decided to get off. But I was in the air again before I could decide which way to go. While I was up that time, someone sings out, "Don't he buck though?" I was in no condition to argue that point. When I arrived back down again, the genuine Mexican plug had departed. So I dug myself out of the ground and made up my mind that if the auctioneer's brother's funeral took place while I was in Carson City, I would postpone all other recreation and attend it. Well, experiences like these make one have respect for dumb animals. So in Honolulu, I asked for a safe horse rather than a fast one. I asked for an excessively gentle horse, one with no spirit whatsoever. A lame one if they had such a thing. Well, they showed me an animal that looked as if he wanted to lean up against something and think. So I chose him. He looked as if he had as many fine points as any other horse. So I hung my hat on one of them behind the saddle, and we started off. He went along peacefully enough, but so absorbed in meditation. This began to worry me. I said to myself, this animal's planning some outrage. No horse ever thought over a subject so profoundly this one is doing, just for nothing. The more this preyed on my mind, the more uneasy I got. So finally I dismounted to see if I could detect anything wild in his eye. I can't tell you what a relief it was to discover he was only asleep. Well, I woke him up, and this startled him into a convulsive canter, which included 3 short steps and 1 long one, something like the sweeping plunge of a ship in a storm. Well, around noon, I spurred my animated trance along a stretch of level beach where I'd noticed a bevy of nude young native ladies bathing in the sea. This was exactly the kind of local color I was after for my newspaper. So I went down and sat on their clothes. Begged them to come out, for it seemed to me the sea was rising, and I was satisfied they were undertaking some risk. But they went right on with their sport, swimming, laughing, splashing each other about. It was a heartwarming spectacle. I spent considerable time there, for I intended to be conscientious about my report to the newspaper. But when I turned around again, I was surprised to find that my horse was asleep again, which goes to show you that there is some difference between a man and a horse. You cannot rely on a horse to gather news. Well, when the missionaries first came to these lovely islands, those native ladies called on them to pay their respects, not even clothed in a blush. This put quite a strain on decorum. Those younger missionaries, fresh out of divinity school, found it hard to establish the proper spiritual rapport in such informal surroundings. But in church, the situation was even more ticklish. Faced with a completely naked congregation, the poor preacher found it difficult to keep his eye on the text and go on with the services. Well, here was a serious problem with morale which had been generally skipped over in divinity school. And at first, the poor preachers were nonplussed. But then they remembered the Christian principle that nothing needs reforming so much as other people's habits. And that solved the problem. They told their converts it's difficult enough to get into heaven fully clothed, but to attempt it naked might seem like blasphemy. So they imported a quantity of hats, bonnets, neckties, other essential wearing apparel, distributed them, and begged these descendants of Adam and Eve not to come to church naked the next Sunday. And they didn't. But being an unselfish people, they divided up their wares among their neighbors. So on the following Sabbath, in the midst of a reading of a hymn, a stately dame would sweep down the aisle with nothing in the world on but a stovepipe hat and a pair of cheap gloves. Another would enter with a flourish, with the sleeves of a bright calico dress tied round her waist, and the rest of the garment dragging behind like a peacock's tail. Off duty. A stately buck would enter, with the legs of a pair of pantaloons tied round his neck, and the rest of his person untrammeled. The poor creatures were gazing with each other and perfectly satisfied that they're as well dressed for the hereafter as any other Christian. They gazed at each other with a good deal of admiration. It's plain to see the young ladies were taking note of what each other had on, just as if they'd always lived in a land of Bibles and knew what churches were made for. I visited the king of the Sandwich Islands. He said, "We understand Christianity. We have eaten the missionaries." Why don't we import missionaries from China and send them to the needed fields? There are 1,511 American missionaries out there, converting 2 Chinamen apiece per annum against an uphill birth rate of 33,000 natives. Now, if we can offer our missionaries a richer deal at home at lighter expense, why shouldn't they give us a chance? Those Chinese are universally considered honest, industrious, honorable. Why don't we give the poor things a rest? We owe them something. Besides, once civilized, China can never be uncivilized again. I've been studying about this a lot. All kind of missionaries. All kind of missionaries. Leave China. Come home and convert these Christians. I wonder if God invented man because he is disappointed in the monkey. Man is the most interesting jackass there is. He thinks the deity sits up nights to admire him. He's the Creator's pet. Now you may wonder why. Well, regard his intellect. Man is a reasoning animal, although I think that's subject to dispute. I've been studying this reasoning animal for years now, and I find results humiliating. For example, I experimented with a cat and a dog, taught them to be friends, put them in a cage. I introduced a rabbit. In an hour they were friends. Then I added a fox, a goose, a squirrel, a kangaroo, and finally a monkey. They all lived together in perfect peace. Well, next I caught an Irish Catholic and put him in the cage. When he appeared tame, I added a Presbyterian. Then a Turk from Constantinople, a wandering Jew, a Baptist from the wilds of Arkansas, a Buddhist from China, and finally a Salvation Army colonel. When I came back, there wasn't a specimen left alive. These reasoning animals had disagreed on a theological detail and carried the matter to a higher court. Man is the only animal with the one true religion. Several of them. He loves his neighbor as himself and cuts his throat if his theology isn't straight. Is a human race a joke, do you suppose? Put together in a dull time, nothing else more important to do? In the last 5 or 6 years, 5 or 6,000 years, there's been high civilizations have risen, flourished, commanded the wonder of the world, and then faded away and disappeared. And not one of them, until ours, ever invented a sweeping and adequate way to kill masses of people. They all did their best. But only the Christian civilization has scored a triumph to be proud of. And before long, it will be recognized that the only competent killers are Christians. And then the world will go to the schools of the Christians, not to acquire his religion, but his guns. It was a time of great and exalting excitement. The country was up in arms. The war was on. In every breast burned the holy fire of patriotism. Drums were beating. Bands were playing. Toy pistols popping. The bunched firecrackers hissing and sputtering. On every hand and far down the fading and receding spread of roofs and balconies, a fluttering wilderness of flags flashed in the sun. Daily, the young volunteers marched down the wide avenues, gay and fine in their new uniforms. The proud mothers and fathers, sisters and sweethearts, cheering them on with voices choked with happy emotion as they swept by. Nightly, the packed mass meetings listened, panting, to patriot oratory which stirred the deepest deeps of their hearts, and which they interrupted at briefest intervals with cyclones of applause, the tears running down their cheeks the while. In the churches, the pastors preached devotion to flag and country and invoked the God of battles, beseeching his aid in our good cause, with outpourings of fervent eloquence which moved every listener. It was indeed a glad and gracious time. And the half-dozen rash spirits that ventured to disapprove of the war and cast a doubt upon its righteousness straightway got such a stern and angry warning that for their personal safety's sake, they quickly shrank out of sight and offended no more in that way. Sunday morning came. The next day, the battalions would leave for the front. The church was filled. The young volunteers were there, their faces alight with martial dreams, visions of the stern advance, the gathering momentum, the rushing charge, the flight of the foe, the tumult, the enveloping smoke, the fierce pursuit, the surrender. Then, home from the war, bronzed heroes, welcomed, adored, submerged in golden seas of glory. With the volunteers sat their loved ones, proud, happy, and envied by their neighbors and friends who had no brothers or sons to send forth to the field of honor, there to win for the flag, or failing, die the noblest of noble deaths. The service proceeded. A war chapter from the Old Testament was read. The first prayer was said. It was followed by an organ burst that shook the building. And with one impulse, the house rose with glowing eyes and beating hearts and poured out that tremendous invocation, God the all-terrible, thou who ordainest, thunder thy clarion and lightning thy sword. Then came the long prayer. None can remember the likes of it, for passionate pleading and moving and beautiful language. The burden of its supplication was that the ever-merciful and benignant Father of us all would look after our noble young soldiers and aid, comfort, encourage them in their patriotic duty. Bless them. Shield them in the day of battle and hour of peril. Bear them in his mighty hand. Make them strong and confident, invincible in the bloody onset. Help them to crush the foe. Grant to them and to their flag and country imperishable honor and glory. An aged stranger entered and moved with slow and noiseless steps up the main aisle, his eyes fixed upon the minister, his long body clothed in a robe that reached to his feet, his long hair descending in a frothy cataract to his shoulders, his seamy face unnaturally pale, pale even to ghastliness. With all eyes watching and wondering, he made his silent way. Without hesitating, he ascended to the minister's side and stood there, waiting. The minister, unaware of his presence, continued his moving prayer, and at last finished it with the words uttered in fervent appeal, "Bless our arms. Grant us the victory, O Lord our God, Father and protector of our land and flag." The stranger touched his arm and motioned him to step aside, which the startled minister did, and took his place. During some moments, he surveyed the spellbound audience with solemn eyes, from whence burned uncanny light. Then in a deep voice he said, "I come from the throne, bearing a message from Almighty God. He has heard the prayer of your servant, his shepherd, and will grant it, if such shall be your desire, after I shall have explained its import. That is to say, its full import. For it is likened to many of the prayers of men, in that it asks for more than he who utters it is aware of, except he pause and think. Your servant has prayed his prayer. Has he paused and taken thought? Is it one prayer? No, it is two, one uttered, the other not. Both have reached the ear of him who heareth all supplications, the spoken and the unspoken. Ponder this, keep it in mind. If you would beseech a blessing upon yourself, beware, lest without intent you invoke a curse upon some neighbor at the same time. If you would pray for the blessings of rain upon your crops which need it, by that act you may be praying for a curse upon some neighbor's crops which may not need rain and be injured by it. Your servant has prayed his prayer, the uttered part of it. I am commissioned of God to put into words the other part of it, that part which your pastor and also you in your hearts fervently prayed silently and ignorantly and unthinkingly. God grant that it was so. You heard these words, grant us the victory, O Lord our God. This is sufficient. The whole of the uttered prayer is compacted into these pregnant words. Elaborations are not necessary. When you have prayed for victory, you have prayed for certain things which follow victory, must follow it, cannot help but follow it. Upon the listening Spirit of God the Father fell also the unspoken part of the prayer. He commandeth me to put it into words. Listen. O Lord our God, our young patriots, idols of our hearts, go forth to battle. Be thou with them. With them in spirit we also go forth from the sweet peace of our beloved fireside to fight the foe. O Lord our God, help us to tear their soldiers to bloody shreds with our shells. Help us to cover their smiling fields with the pale forms of their patriot dead. Help us to drown the thunder of the guns with the shrieks of their wounded, writhing in pain. Help us to lay waste their humble homes with a hurricane of fire. Help us to wring the hearts of their unoffending widows with unavailing grief. Help us to turn them out roofless with their little children, to wander unfriended the waste of their desolated land, in rags and hunger and thirst, sport of the sun flames of summer and the icy winds of winter, broken in spirit, worn with travail, imploring thee for the refuse of the grave, and denied it. For our sakes who adore thee, Lord, blast their hopes, blight their lives, protract their bitter pilgrimage, make heavy their steps, water their way with their tears, stain the white snow with the blood of their wounded feet. We ask for it in the spirit of love. of Him who is the source of love, an ever faithful friend and refuge of all who are sore beset, and seek His aid with humble and contrite hearts. Amen. Ye have prayed it. If you still desire it, speak. The messenger from the Most High waits. Well, now, ladies and gentlemen, last year I celebrated my 70th escape from the gallows. I'm approaching the threshold of age. Now, when you get to be 70, you're supposed to sit up there on that seventh terrace summit and tell the rest of the world how to get up there. They all do it, you know, all these garrulous old people. Explain the process and dwell on the particulars with senile rapture. Well, I've been anxious to explain my process for some time, and now I have the right. I believe I've attained my 70 years in the usual way, by sticking strictly to a scheme of life that would kill anybody else. I have just a few simple rules I try to follow. I make it a point never to smoke more than one cigar at a time. I have no other restrictions. I never take any exercise except sleeping and resting. I don't intend to. Can't see any benefit in being tired. As for diet, I always stick to those things who disagree with me until one or the other of us get the best of it. Well, last spring, it did get the best of it. Till then, I always believed that I could have a little mince pie before midnight, but it didn't work out. But the point I want to make to you is you can't make old age with another man's road. My habits protect my life. They probably assassinate you. You have to make up your own rules, then stick to them. That isn't always easy to do, because there'll always be someone around trying to reform you, trying to take all the pleasure right out of your life. But don't let them. If you can't make 70 by a comfortable road, don't go. Oh, I suppose it's best to obey the rules when you're young, just so you'll have the strength to break them when you're old. But you cannot forget that experience is the best way to find out about something. A fellow that takes a hold of the bull by the tail once is getting 60 or 70 times as much information as one who hasn't. A fellow that starts in to carry a cat home by the tail is getting in information that will always be useful. Not likely to go dim or doubtful. Chances are he won't try to carry the cat that way again. But if he does want to carry the cat that way, I say let him. It isn't always easy to be eccentric, you know. My experience shows that in the first place, God created idiots. This was for practice. Then He created school boards. I've had a good life. I've traveled. I've seen all the foreign countries I care to see, except heaven and hell. I've only a vague curiosity about one of them. Although I would like to see my old ancestor, Satan. I have no special regard for Satan, but I think I could claim to have no prejudice against him. May even be a little bit his way, on account of his not having a fair show. All religions issue Bibles against him, and so the most injurious things about him, but we never hear his side. We have only the evidence for the prosecution, yet we've already rendered the verdict. Now, to my mind, this is irregular. It's un-English. It's un-American. It is French. We may not pay Satan reverence, for this would be indiscreet, but at least we could respect his talents. Anyone who for untold centuries has maintained the imposing position as spiritual head of 4/5 of the human race and political head of the whole of it must have executive abilities. I should like to meet him. I'd rather meet him and shake him by the tail than any other politician on the planet. Once in Hartford, Connecticut, I was in the midst of a large congregation for which a visiting missionary had been invited to preach. The preacher's voice was beautiful. He told us about the sufferings of the natives. And he pleaded for help with such moving simplicity that I mentally doubled the 50 cents I'd planned to put in the plate. He described the pitiful misery of those savages so vividly that the dollar I had in mind gradually rose to 5. Then that preacher continued, and I decided all the cash I had on me would be insufficient, and decided to write a large check. Then he went on. He went on about the dreadful state of those natives, and I abandoned the idea of the check. And he went on, and I got back to $5. And he went on, and I got back to 4, 2, 1. And still, he went on. So when the plate finally came around, I took 10 cents out of it. Well, it's time to go. My feet are tired, and you're tired. It's a terrible death to be talked to death. But I cannot let you go without telling you something that is on my heart. You know, I can always be chafing. I can always be chaffing. I must sometimes lay the cap and bells aside and recognize that I am of the human race. And I want to tell you, during the last year, since my 70th birthday, I've received hundreds of letters from all conditions of people: men, women, children. And there is compliment, praise, but above all, and better than all, there is in them a note of affection. Praise is well. Compliment is well. But affection, that is the last and final and most precious reward anyone can win. And I'm most grateful to have that reward. Many and many a year ago, I gathered an incident from Dana's 2 years before the Mass. It was like this. There was a presumptuous little self-important skipper engaged in the dried apple and kitchen furniture trade. He was always hailing every ship that came in sight. He did it just to hear himself talk, to air his small grandeur. One day a majestic Indian man came flying by, with course on course of canvas, towering into the sky, her decks and yards swarming with sailors, her hull burdened to the plimsoll line with the rich freightage of precious spices, lading the breezes with mysterious and gracious odors of the Orient. It was a noble spectacle. Well, skipper popped into the shrouds and squeaked out a hail. "Ship ahoy! What ship is that? And whence? And whither?" In a deep and thunderous bass, the answer came back through the speaking trumpet. "A Begum of Bengal, 142 days out from Canton, homeward bound. What ship is that?" Well, it just crushed the poor little skipper's vanity flat. And he squeaked back most humbly, "Only the Mary Ann, 14 hours out from Boston, bound for Kittery Point, with nothing in particular." Oh, what an eloquent word, that "only," to express the depths of his humbleness. Now that is just my case. during just 1 hour of the 24, not more. I pause and reflect in the stillness of the night, with the echoes of your affection still lingering in my ears. Then I am humble. Then I am properly beat. And for that little while, I'm only the Mary Ann, 14 hours out, cargoed with vegetables and tinware. But during all the other 23 hours, my vain self-complacency rides high on the white crest of your approval. Then I'm the stately India man, plowing the great seas under a cloud of canvas, and cargoed with the kindest words that have ever been vouchsafed to any wandering alien in this world. Then I am the Begum of Bengal, 142 days out from Canton, homeward bound. Thank you.